Today I'm going to be explaining Spring Tutorial 6, uh, basically working with Swagger and implementing that in our tutorial management application that works with the REST API. Cool, so basically this tutorial management REST API application is basically going to allow users to create, read, update, delete, and filter tutorial records. So it follows a clean layered architecture with controllers handling HTTP requests, services managing business logic, and models representing data. Um, and obviously integrated it with Swagger uh, so that we are able to test our API requests and to document our APIs and to have proper explanation of these API requests that we're making. Cool, so just to firstly demonstrate that I have Swagger implementing the application. As you can see here, this user interface has different endpoints. So this is basically representing Swagger. And I can make different requests to the specific endpoints um, in order to fetch, update, delete, or create my data. So that's what Swagger does. Swagger is just allowing us to document our API requests, and it gives a UI in order to test our API requests, and also provides like proper explanations for our requests based off the controller that I basically set in here, tutorial controller, which has the different endpoints that I'm making my request to. So once Swagger has scanned all those endpoints, what it does on the user interface, it describes the different requests in detail that I'm gonna make. So for instance, it's get request to fetch one specific tutorial by accessing it with this endpoint /ID, and it explains that we're getting a tutorial by its ID with details, the parameters, and all of that. So it just gives a clear description and allows us to document our API request. So just to demonstrate that it works, firstly I'm going to make a post request to API /tutorials in order to create a new tutorial. Cool. So in order to do that, it's basically a post request that I'm going to make to API /tutorials. So firstly I'll set first I'm gonna make a get request actually just to see all the data is in there. So in order to make a get request to fetch all the data, we'll choose this option, and basically all you have to do is hit execute, and then it fetches all the data in our application. Now as you can see, we have one tutorial over here. So in order to basically create a tutorial, we'll make a post request, and basically what we can do is set the title of the tutorial to anything. So then we give the description of the tutorial as well. And then we either set the published field to true or false, and then once all those details are in there, click execute, and then it shows that the tutorial is created over here. Now it has the ID 1, the title of the tutorial, description, as well as whether it's published or not, with the boolean value of true. And then the 200 OK message is basically indicating that our post request to create a tutorial was successful. then I can basically fetch the data by basically sending a GET request, and it fetches all the data because we only have one tutorial. If I go create another tutorial, for instance, just create a new tutorial. So we're making another post request to create a tutorial, and then the second one is created. As you can see, the ID, it gives this tutorial I created the ID of 2, and it shows all the fields with the specific details. So that's creating a tutorial. If I go fetch that data, fetch that data, then you see the second tutorial I created along with the first one, so it shows all the tutorials in my application on my API. Cool. I can basically also update one specific tutorial. In order to do that, we have to locate that specific tutorial we want to update by its ID. So let's say we want to update the second tutorial. Then we'll have to add the details of that tutorial so that we can know how we want to update it. So when we place that as our body, let's say we want to update the description. And if we execute, we'll see that that tutorial gets updated, and then we can go fetch all the tutorials again to show that it was updated. So that's to update a tutorial, and then we can also basically delete a tutorial. So if we delete the first one, then that tutorial gets deleted. So that just demonstrates the API requests that work with Swagger. You can also document your your API requests by saving. So if we download here, what happens is we can basically save the results that we get, or the JSON formatted data, after our GET request is created. So as you can see, I downloaded that specific API request result onto my local computer. So this is what we have over here. So that's basically how Swagger works in the application. Then, to show how I implemented it, firstly, in my pom.xml, I have placed this dependency over here, Spring Doc, Open API, Starter, Web MVC UI over here. This ensures that my user interface for Swagger is there to engage with the API endpoint. And then to enable it and get it to work, over here I place Swagger UI path, which shows this URL best coder documentation, and then the path for best coder API docs. So for that endpoint, when I visit that, it shows this API over here, representing my tutorial management API, the description of my application, the name of the application, and it just shows all the details with regards to that. Then basically here I set API docs and enabled it and set it to true. I set Swagger UI enabled and set it to true to enable the user interface for Swagger that I just showed now. And then packages to scan, I placed this path, which is accessing our controller and our application. As you can see, base coder Spring Swagger controller. Reason why we need to scan the tutorial controller is because this is where we set our endpoints in order to make those API requests to these specific endpoints to either create, delete, read, or update data. But before we get there, firstly I have in my application my Open API configuration. So here I set the localhost to 8080, inject the production server URL from application properties. Then my Open API method is basically I'm going to define development server with its URL and description over here. Here it defines the production server with its URL and description. Here I set the contact information for the API. Here I'm creating the API info section with specific fields such as the title, version, contact, description, terms of service, and license. Then in my tutorial controller, this is where my requests are being handled. So firstly, I have a post request to /tutorials. All these endpoints that I set here are being mounted on our base endpoint, which is API. So API tutorials is an endpoint that way we make our post request in order to create a new tutorial with this create tutorial method. Then I have over here get request to fetch all the tutorials with this get all tutorials method. That request is also made to /tutorials as I showed here on Swagger. Here then we have a get request to fetch one tutorials /ID by placing the tutorial ID, right? In order to fetch one tutorial, we need to fetch that tutorial by its ID as indicated here, because Swagger explains it so properly. Then we have a put request to update one tutorial, of which I demonstrated as well, and that's made to /tutorials /ID. So whatever the tutorial ID is of the tutorial we want to update, and it calls the update tutorial method, which will initially update the tutorial. This is to delete a tutorial, made to that same endpoint. So it's a delete request to delete all the tutorials. A get request to fetch all the tutorials that are published. So tutorials that have a published status set to true. So as you can see here, when I was creating my tutorials, I set this one to true, the published status, and this one to false. So what that request is handling the functionality of getting a tutorial, getting tutorials that are published, essentially. Then I have my model for tutorial, which defines the specific fields that make up one tutorial, which are the ID, title, description, published, which is a Boolean value, where you choose true or false. Then I have the tutorial constructor, which initializes all the fields that I've set here when an object is created, of course. And then different setters and getters. So a getter for title, setter for title, getter for description, as well as a setter for description, and then a getter for the Boolean value based off whether tutorial is published or not, and also a setter for the published field. then my main method to run the application as well over here. So that's basically how the application works with Swagger incorporated into it. It's just helping us make requests to create, read, update, or delete tutorials, and also describing these specific requests on the Swagger UI, as well as helping us document our API requests as well. So that is basically tutorial 6 for Spring.